What if Kaiba dueled Marik in the Battle City Finals by TGS Anime?
What if Kaiba dueled Marik in the Battle City Finals? How would the duel have played out? And who would have won? In the original timeline, the semi-finals are decided as Yugi versus Kaiba, Joey versus Marik. Marik beats Joey, Yugi beats Kaiba. The finals are Yugi versus Marik. Yugi wins. This result is of course the canonical path because this is the direction that the story chose to go in. On top of that though, it is also the result that the majority of the players wanted. Kaiba wanted to duel Yugi first because he knew that he would need Slifer and Obelisk's combined power to take on Marik's Winged Dragon of Ra. So he needed to duel and beat Yugi first to take his Egyptian God card. This happens, except for the bit where he beats Yugi. Joey wanted to duel Marik because he wanted to save and revenge Mai as soon as possible. He also promised Yugi he would meet him in the finals. This result does happen and Joey was about to beat Marik, but then he collapsed and then technically died for a little while, so he was unable to declare his attack and win. Now in terms of Yugi and Marik's desires, Yugi was kind of all over the place. He didn't mind dueling against Kaiba because they are fated destined rivals and all this. He wanted to duel against Joey because Joey and him have promised to meet in the Battle City Finals and duel each other, but the main person he wanted to duel against was Marik, because he didn't want Joey going against Marik in case he lost, which unfortunately did happen. And really, he didn't want Kaiba going against Marik as well in case he lost. And on top of that, I don't think he states it, but then Marik would take Obelisk and then he'd have to face Obelisk and Ra in the final duel, which would have been a huge disadvantage and probably would have lost. So then, that begs the question, what if we mix things up? Well, we have three hypothetical scenarios. The pairings are changed instead to Yugi versus Joey and Kaiba versus Marik. Could Kaiba beat Marik in the semi-finals at Battle City without Slifer the Sky Dragon? Scenario 2, Kaiba versus Yugi and Marik versus Joey. Kaiba beats Yugi, takes Slifer the Sky Dragon, beats Marik in the finals. Could Kaiba beat Marik?
That was actually a really good clip here of the exchange from the duel. Very good clip there.
With Slifer and Obelisk together. The third and most wacky hypothetical scenario, Kaiba versus Joey and Yugi versus Marik in the semi-finals. In this scenario, it is confirmed that if Kaiba dueled against Joey, Kaiba would have come out on top because he was able to beat Joey without an Egyptian God card. So with one, he should still beat him. So I think that is confirmed. However, to get our final pairing, in the other duel in the semi-finals, Yugi versus Marik, Marik in this scenario beats Yugi. He takes Yugi's Slifer the Sky Dragon. I guess technically he would kill the Pharaoh, so he would move on to the finals. Seto Kaiba versus Marik Ishtar. Marik has Slifer the Sky Dragon and the Winged Dragon of Ra. All the chips are in Marik's favor. Could Kaiba win this duel? So, all right, let's go through them. Starting with the first one, Kaiba versus Marik.
I like that we're exploring all three options because deck construction does actually matter in this one. It does matter if Marik actually has more than the Winged Dragon of Ra or not. I think I like that we're exploring all of these.
In the semi-finals. So in this scenario, Kaiba is dueling against Marik first. Yugi is dueling Joey in the other bracket. So how would this play out? Well, first things first, Kaiba is at a serious disadvantage because he only has Obelisk the Tormentor. He did state himself that he needs all the help he can get to defeat the Winged Dragon of Ra, and he pretty much knew that he would need Slifer the Sky Dragon in order to do that. This is proved to be true because when Yugi duels against Marik, it requires both Obelisk and Slifer to overpower the Winged Dragon of Ra a bunch of times. And when the Winged Dragon of Ra would overpower, say, Obelisk, at least he had Slifer to direct an attack and tank some of the damage and things like that. Without that option, it is a huge disadvantage right out the gate for Kaiba going against him straight away. However,
as far as I'm aware as well, if Kaiba were to Crush Card Virus Marik, it would not affect the Winged Dragon of Ra. I mean, we're assuming under the assumption that in deck it would still be affected by spells and traps, but because it's question mark, I think it is still treated as technically 0 for certain calculations. So even then, Crush Card couldn't even get rid of it.
Scale-wise, it's an interesting matchup. So think of it this way: Yugi beats Kaiba. Yugi's better than Kaiba. Yugi beats Marik. technically, Yugi is better than Marik. Kaiba beats Joey. Kaiba is better than Joey.
Sure.
Joey beat Marik, but did pass out before he could, like, declare an attack, but was about to beat him.
From prior reactions, we do know that Marik was misplaying the entire duel. We do know that that he did not take Joey seriously, so was actively not taking certain actions. So from a skill level, I think we should acknowledge that Marik is technically better, but it was his mentality and mindset going into the duel that caused that outcome to happen. I think that if Marik was playing seriously, I think that would have been an outright just absolute stomp.
So Joey technically is better than Marik. Now, I know what you're going to say. Marik might have been toying with Joey a little bit too much because he was kind of obsessed with just killing Joey rather than just like winning the duel kind of thing. If Marik would have taken things seriously, would the outcome have been different? Well, unfortunately, we don't really know. But Marik toys with everyone. He's always trying to shadow game shenanigans people out of victories. So, you know, that's kind of one of the things. And if it's not a shadow game shenanigan, the way he tends to win as well is people just seem to want to steal the Winged Dragon of Ra, mess up with it because they don't know the ancient Egyptian chants, and that tends to make them fumble the bag. But like, when you consider the scaling, if Kaiba beat Joey and Joey would have beat Marik, then technically Kaiba should beat Marik, and Kaiba beat Joey without an Egyptian god card as well, so Kaiba with Obelisk is stronger, so Kaiba should have defeated Joey more steadily, really, if he had Obelisk. So by that same logic, yeah, I guess he could have beat Marik with Obelisk. It does make sense. Now, of course, I know duels aren't as like simple as that. It's not just a matter of who has the higher number. There's a lot of different matchup things that need to be considered, but that is something that swings into Kaiba's favor for letting him win this duel. The next important thing to take...
I mean, I like the logic train we're going with, and I think that as many people could probably just dismiss it, I do feel that it is a necessary thing to discuss at minimum, because there are going to be people who are making arguments like this. So it does play to the audience, and it does play into the arguments that can and will be had. I do, because, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, just because we can say Yugi is better than Kaiba, it ultimately depends what the matchup is. Does Yugi brick because dude plays the actual commander deck? You know, Kaiba's playing triplicates of Blue Eyes, right? I mean, like, yeah, there's matchup things that go into that. When we talk about Joey beating Marik, I mean, when misplays become habitual, because the way Marik wants to play is he wants to entrench himself and he wants to torture, all intents and purposes, his opponent, right? He's fine doing, you know, death by 1,000 cuts. He's fine, you know, whittling his opponent down as he effectively builds the fortress around him. You know, he's just going to drop the Aegis line. He's going to bunker down. He's going to make it so his opponent really can't get advantage on him. And then he knows that his opponents do want things like the Winged Dragon of Ra, thus kind of dangling it like bait in front of them, having them take it, and then they mess up with the Winged Dragon of Ra or aren't able to close out the game with it. Therefore, Marik, you know, continues on with it. He's very slow, methodical, manipulative, right? Is what I'm trying to get across. And it ultimately depends if he can get that off against Kaiba, or if Kaiba's sheer aggression is going to keep him on the off foot. It comes down to a number of factors. I think there would have to be, without really kind of trying to simulate it, it becomes a hard thing to really kind of look at. Because, I mean, I could say, well, you know, Kaiba starts off with a starting hand of this, and then he draws into his Blue Eyes first turn, but it's like, okay, but what happens if he doesn't, right? So tackling this to begin with as a hypothetical is already a monumental task in and of itself, because there's so much discourse that's going to happen around it. I think the scaling, yeah, as I said, necessary, ultimately doesn't really matter. I don't necessarily think so. It comes down to what is played, how is played, and each of the characters' philosophies going into the duel.
Consideration is the weapons that both duelists have to counter each other. In terms of weapons, what does Kaiba have to battle Marik with? Well, right off the bat, he has Obelisk the Tormentor. It has a base stat of 4,000 attack points, which for Marik to deal with is quite difficult. Don't get me wrong, Marik has a really high potential of attack points with his Winged Dragon of Ra. Like, if he can pump all of his life points into that monster, That's a huge monster he can make.
He's a big boy.
He needs to have his monster all the...
As Aqua Teen Hunger Force would say, Super Mega Ultra Chicken, or what was the meme? It was the Witch Doctor episode. She just becomes Super Mega Chicken Raw.
time at its most powerful, because Kaiba has so many high attack point monsters in his deck. 3,000 attack Blue Eyes White Dragons, 4,000 attack Obelisk the Tormentor, a Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon with 4,500 attack.
Yeah.
Marik tends to sit...
I have to interrupt really quick. I cannot see Obelisk the Tormentor without thinking about Oryx from King's Fall. I literally cannot. Destiny has kind of ruined Obelisk the Tormentor for me.
With his raw, like, more or less around 3,000 attack points. Don't get me wrong. If he summoned it properly, attributed 3 monsters, all their attack points added to Ra, and then dumped all of his life points in, he could have an absolutely massive Winged Dragon of Ra. But he tends to not do that. He tends to cheese out Ra with Monster Reborn. And I feel like against like Yugi and Joey, that kind of works because they don't utilize powerful attack point monsters very often. But with Kaiba, that's kind of his thing. So I think that could be problematic for Marik, to be fair. And let's also consider Obelisk's special ability. It has the effect that if Kaiba tributes 2 monsters while Obelisk is on the field, it will then destroy all monsters the opponent controls, albeit probably couldn't destroy the Winged Dragon of Ra since it's a higher hierarchy level as it. However, by doing this, he can deal 4,000 direct damage to the opponent. The fact that Kaiba needs to get out 5 monsters, it's not unheard of, but it is hard to do. But if he can do that, Marik barely, well, sometimes he has more than 4,000 life points, but a lot of the times he's sitting at like 1 life point. But I mean, that could deal with Marik as a final blow, so I mean, you can see it happen. Same thing again, Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon is another weapon that Kaiba has, a 4,500 attack point monster that Marik will need to outpower to get over. However, to be fair, Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon doesn't have any protections like the Egyptian God cards do, so it probably would struggle against Marik. Marik could get rid of it with his Phoenix Mode's ability to destroy a card of the field. Marik also plays a card called Defusion, which lets him defuse monsters. Marik tends to use it on his self with the Winged Dragon of Ra. When he fuses with the Winged Dragon of Ra with his life points, he can split himself up to get his life points back. So that's something he can do. Or if Kaiba goes to attack and destroy Winged Dragon of Ra with Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, he could defuse it back into its free Blue Eyes White Dragon forms. So that is something he can do, but we'll talk about.
If I remember correctly, at this stage in the anime, if you defusion, the attack would just miss as well. So that's a wasted attack. Even though defusing, say, a Cyber End Dragon into 3 Cyber Dragons, the field does change at that point. So you do have a replay of replay of battle that does occur. So you can pick a new battle target. There was a point in the anime, and I think this was well in the GX as well, where defusion would cause an attack to outright miss.
That a little bit later, there's something interesting with that.
Because the target's no longer there.
Is a very powerful weapon that Kaiba has. It would eliminate all of the powerful monsters in Marik's deck. But I guess the Winged Dragon of Ra wouldn't be eliminated since it has unknown attack points before it's summoned or anything. So that wouldn't really do too much, to be fair. But obviously, Crush Card Virus is a decent card, and I guess it could get rid of cards like Lava Golem, which could be a problem for Kaiba in the duels. So that's...
I mean, you get rid of things like Helmhomer, which hand rip. Like we saw this during the the Joey duel, right? Helmhomer goes out the window. Wasn't it Gilgarth? I think Gilgarth was 18. Sure, it gets you get to things like that. But I mean, you still have things like Electric Eel you have to deal with. Sure, you end up ripping Marik's ability to kaiju you with Lava Golem. You end up ripping that out of the way. It's like, does it do the most? No, it does less than, say, it did to like Joey's deck when that got crush carded. It does less than, say, if Kaiba got crush carded. It does things, but ultimately I think Marik is able to operate under crush card, right? Like how we talk about certain decks being able to operate under Skill Drain or operate under Anti-Spell Fragrance, right? Like certain decks can operate under certain conditions. Marik's deck can operate under Crush Card. I think that he's varied enough, and because of his death by 1,000 cuts kind of mentality to kind of, torture his opponent, I think that ultimately he would be fine.
Something that could happen right there. Another big weapon for Kaiba was actually the card that he gave to Yugi to help him beat Marik. Fiend's Sanctuary. The reason that Kaiba gave Fiend's Sanctuary to Yugi is because it's a perfect counter to the Winged Dragon of Ra's OTK play, where Marik gets it out, gives it all of his attack points, and it attacks directly for game. So what this card does is it summons itself to the field, this little Fiend token thing. It will then tank the attack and deal the damage back to the opponents, basically turning their OTK back on themselves. Now, in the context of the episode, when Yugioh does this against Marik, Marik is forced to use defusion to stop his attack, and he saves himself from getting basically OTK'd by himself. But if we, I guess, could force Marik to use defusion prior to this, get out Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, attempt to attack, Marik has to defuse it because it's too powerful, and then we go for the Fiend Sanctuary play, he doesn't have a defusion anymore, so that could be a potential way to win with Fiend Sanctuary.
So that actually does feel like a replay of battle, though, right? Winged Dragon of Ra fused, like subtext fused or whatever. Winged Dragon of Ra, comma Marik, right? Attacks, or I guess Winged Dragon of Ra fusion monster does attack. Why don't we have a Winged Dragon of Ra fusion monster now that I think about it? That'd be cool. Be some cool Egyptian god support. We have Egyptian god slime now, to be fair. Swings in, Fiend token spawn enters play on. How would that work? Because you can't chain it to Fiend token, right? I guess you could. So it depends when defusion is activated, because defusion is a spell speed 2. It is a quick play, right? So I guess it's Winged Dragon of Ra fusion swings, activate Fiend Sanctuary, Chainlink 1, Chainlink 2, defusion, Winged Dragon of Ra base comes out, and then Fiendsmith token is summoned, but it feels like it is attacking the Fiend Sanctuary token. So I would assume it would be spell speed 2, activate Fiend Sanctuary sticks, resolution, Fiend Sanctuary sticks, Marik is swinging in during battle phase, but before damage calculation, defusion activates, getting rid of the fusion Winged Dragon of Ra, replacing it with regular Winged Dragon of Ra. Replay of battle, choosing not to replay battle because board state changes, or I guess it's also a different monster entirely. I guess it depends on where the defusion actually activates, because it could be a replay of battle, but it could also be that like the actual Winged Dragon of Ra, the fusion one, is not on the field anymore, therefore it physically cannot attack.
I mean, like, that could be Kaiba's like final trump card. Obviously, when you structure the episode, if you're doing it like the anime, you need to work up to something. Like Obelisk tried to win the duel but couldn't defeat the Winged Dragon of Ra, and then Kaiba resorts to this interesting strategy to go for it, and this is his like final play to do. Or I can see this actually failing, and then he has to rely on something else to go for it in the end. Another card that Kaiba has,
Hell Poemer throughout the duel as well, if Hell Poemer were activated, would be ripping Kaiba's Blue Eyes out of his hand. Let's be real. It's random, quote unquote, right? But it would be ripping Blue Eyes out of Kaiba's hands and would be ripping certain things out of his hand.
It's something that you used against Yugioh. Kaiba's original plan when he dueled against Yugioh was to steal Slife the Sky Dragon and then use it against Yugioh. Now, Lullaby of Obedience is an interesting card because what Kaiba would do with it is he gets to declare a level 8 or higher monster's name, and if it's in the opponent's deck, he has to add that card to his hand. That's insane. He'd just say, the Winged Dragon of Ra, take the Winged Dragon of Ra from Marik's deck, and then put it in his own hand. Now, the problem with this play is everybody else does this. Bakura did it against Marik, Mai did it against Marik, and these things did not work out. But I like to think that Kaiba's would work because he does know the majority of the effects of the Winged Dragon of Ra. He's watched all these duels play out.
He can also read the Winged Dragon of Ra, which was a plot point.
So I think analyze the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics that are on the card. So if anyone was going to pull this play off, I think Kaiba is the one. Then again, third time's the charm. This could be the third time that this could just absolutely mess up. And Kaiba does have ancient Egyptian heritage, so Ra technically would obey him and everything. So potentially. Yeah. I think a big one as well for Kaiba's weapons is he has a card called Virus Cannon, which is nuts, by the way. When you activate it, you send all spell cards in your opponent's hand and in their deck to the grave. Woof. First of all, that's like a third of the deck gone for any duelist that has to go against this. But like the bigger thing of this is Marik really relies on his Monster Reborn strategy to bring back his Winged Dragon of Ra to cheese it out. So losing Monster Reborn and losing, say, Defusion, which is a counter to the Fiend Sanctuary play, this could be a really big deal. This could really hurt Marik. And I just think it's so nuts to have a card like that. It's just ridiculously strong.
I think Kaiba has a faster tempo than Marik does, though. So I mean, if we look at things like how would the duel progress, right? You'd probably have your big first turn, something like Gilgarth, bigger beater, right? Kind of average of that 18. Kaiba could summon something along the lines of like Vorse Raider. He could counter with his own 1800, a Legion, right? Like there's a couple things he could do. First turn might honestly be kind of a stalemate with a little bit of setup, reasonably so, I think, in any way, shape, or form. Getting into our second turn, Marik starts to entrench himself, and this is where they kind of diverge, is that Marik would start to entrench himself a little bit, whether that's going to be setting up with, something like Dark Wind, whether that be certain trap cards, etc., right? Like he's going to try to set up, where Kaiba going into his turn 2 is going to attempt to go on the aggressive, right? He's going to try to say Vorse Raider status. I know it's 19, so he could technically swing into Gilgarth. We're going to give the assumption that for some reason both of them live first turn, right? Something like Legion or Vorse Raider swings in. Maybe activate like a Shrink or something like that, be able to destroy opponent's monster. Kaiba's going to attempt to be aggressive, where Marik is going to lean on that back foot and try to be a lot more defensive and cautious, right? But he has the intent of being, aggressive in a more passive way. He's very passive aggressive with, torture, dots, etc. But Kaiba would very much try to explode out of that. And that's when you get into things like Electric Eel. Like Kaiba gets out his Blue Eyes or something, maybe like turn 3, swinging into Electric Eel. Electric Eel is going to play a big part because Electric Eel cannot be destroyed by battle, therefore attaching to Blue Eyes, shocking Kaiba, which is going to cause both physical and psychological damage because now he's watching his Blue Eyes suffer. But that being said, then you lead into something like, either sacking his Blue Eyes, which he's done in the past, sacking his Blue Eyes for something maybe Obelisk. Obelisk will probably be a plot point super early on, reasonably so, if we look at the narrative structure of how Yu-Gi-Oh works, to which it will be countered by Marik in some way, shape, or form. So Obelisk will be off the field, thus Kaiba will have to default to Blue Eyes at a certain point. Something like Hellpomer gets on the field, maybe that cheat burns out his Monster Reborn. Hellpomer is going to be active to try to put Kaiba on that back foot. It's going to start hand ripping him. Maybe a second or third Blue Eyes gets ripped out of his hand. Something along the lines of maybe Kaiba is finally able to activate like Crush Card Virus, being able to deal with a decent amount of Marik's cards, but ultimately then Winged Dragon of Ra comes out. Thus, we can get into the whole Fiend, the full Fiend Sanctuary token plot point, right? I think like that's a good way to construct it because it deals with all of the points. Because very rarely is the writing like in the whole Arcana thing. The whole Arcana thing, Yugi technically could have won. The game could have finished a lot earlier, but they drag it out for certain reasons, right? Certain narrative beats, philosophical beats, etc. So I think going with a structure like that, I think is kind of like, that hits all the points. That is kind of a slugfest that I feel that Konami would write in some capacity. It really comes down to, when it takes place. Does this take place in the finals? Because if so, they're not necessarily going to have Marik just win, right? From a meta perspective, we can call, Marik's not going to win, so Kaiba would have to win. How does Kaiba win? And then Kaiba winning with maybe like, Fiend Sanctuary or something like that. Him having to burn Monster Reborn for something like Hellpomer early on, or having to burn Monster Reborn for a Winged Dragon of Ra because maybe got hand ripped or something like that. Marik's on the back foot because, he knows that Kaiba added Virus Cannon, so the natural response is going to be to shotgun that Monster Reborn to use it while he still can. Like, there's a number of things that go on here, but I feel that the one I present has tackled most of the plot points that could reasonably occur, and it also goes through each of the characters' decks because we need to sell product. We're Konami. I'm not Konami. I'm not affiliated with Konami, but you get what I'm trying to say.
On the same note as well, I know everybody has it, but Kaiba also has a Monster Reborn, so potentially he could steal the Winged Dragon of Ra from the opponent's graveyard, because I feel like this is the strategy that Kaiba would go for. His plan is to try and take Ra at some point, use its power for his own to take on Marik and defeat him in his perfect victory kind of thing, which is always the thing that always lets Kaiba down, but that is something that he could have done. On top of this, obviously, Marik always has really low life points for the majority of the duel. He has ways of getting life points back, but Kaiba plays a card called Ring of Destruction. Damaging cards, effect damage cards, are quite rare in Battle City, but Kaiba does have one, which is Ring of Destruction. If he manages to destroy one of Marik's other monsters, like, I don't know, like a Holding Chains or just any other monster that
Imagine destroying Hellpomer this way, right? Like we would like, because that would be very much a cool. That's fine. We're both taking 2K, ring of defense, right? Being able to get that wombo combo out, and thus Marik takes 2K, and that's like, oh, but actually, you see, you fool, you have destroyed my Hellpomer. Now you're going to get hand ripped every single turn, right? That is something that Kaiba would fall prey to 100%.
he has. Since most of the time Marik only has 1 life point, he could deal that final bit of damage with a Ring of Destruction play.
This is also true.
And with Magical Trick Mirror as well. This is a card that lets him, when opponent declares an attack, he can use a spell card in the opponent's graveyard. So, like, I could see a counterplay. Marik has, let's just say, a 6,000 attack points, Winged Dragon of Ra that he's fused himself with. He's only got 1 life point. He's attacking into Obelisk Tormentor or Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. As the attack is coming in, Kaiba activates his Magical Trick Mirror, activates the effect of Defusion in Marik's graveyard, defuses the Winged Dragon of Ra with Marik. Obviously, Marik would gain like 6,000 life points because he's splitting the life points back into himself. But a potentially 0 attack point Winged Dragon of Ra would crash into Obelisk the Tormentor or Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, dealing 4,500, 4,000 damage to Marik. That's a huge chunk of change. That sounds like...
Last I checked, there wasn't a spell speed 2. Like, there wasn't like a super poly or something in Battle City, right? As far as I'm aware, using L5R terminology, Marik fusing with the Winged Dragon of Ra is a limited action, right? Or in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's a spell speed 1 interaction. It has to be done on your turn. So, yeah, using Magical Trick Mirror to, say, defusion that, it does force the Winged Dragon of Ra to kind of, you know, be on its own for a little bit. It does strip some of Marik's power away from that. I actually kind of like this thought process.
An amazing comeback potential with this card. Now, I think the most important out of duel thing to consider is, first of all, Kaiba doesn't take part in many shadow duels throughout the course of the series. The only one he really takes part in is, I think, the duel against Pegasus, I think was one. And in the first episode against Yugi, where he gets mind crushed. And then he only ever duels in like life or death games and never really like... The shadow games make it really hard to duel and things like that. So we never really see what Kaiba's like in the same situation as, say, like what Joey was. Could he hack it? Could he not hack it? Well, Kaiba's a very determined person. In fact, I think he's very similar to Joey in that aspect. Both of them are determined. They're unlikely to stay down without trying to get back up. They need these.
So hear me out, though. Kaiba is absolutely jacked. Remember in Duelist Kingdom where he's having to jump out like windows and stuff, and he's able, even in Battle City where he's able to put like, wasn't it one of his Blue Eyes cards between the hammer on a firearm, right, to stop it from firing? Dude is actually just like physically fit. Dude is in a much better physical situation than Joey is.
Victories. I would say Joey has more resilience than Kaiba, though. I feel like Joey would get back up more from defeat than Kaiba would. I feel like defeat to Kaiba or being completely overwhelmed would get to Kaiba than it more would with Joey. Because Joey is the underdog. That is kind of his potential persona. If Kaiba's absolute dominance with power fails, I can see that like, oh no, if my power isn't working, what else do I have kind of thing. So, I don't know, you can make an argument with that. But in Kaiba's defense as well, Marik wields the Millennium Rod. The Millennium Rod has been shown to help Kaiba in a prior duel. During Kaiba's duel against Shizu, the Millennium Rod disobeyed Marik and gave Kaiba a vision of the past, helped him to defy destiny and defeat Shizu. Who's saying that wouldn't happen again? Who's saying that the Millennium Rod really misses Seto Kaiba's previous life, who was the original wielder of the Millennium Rod, wouldn't sort of sabotage Marik, and Marik would actually have to like cast aside his Millennium Rod in the middle of the duel. Like, I can't rely on my shadow magic against Kaiba. I'm gonna have to duel, oh my god, fairly? And that's kind of Marik's thing. So that would be a really interesting duel where Marik's kind of panicking because I can't rely on shadow magic to win with this duel. I have to just duel. But then
I think that this would be a perfect plot point if they fought in the finale. Like, for some reason, Yugi had to say bow out, right? And then Kaiba and him were fighting in the finale, which would mean, of course, like so we're going, at this point, my logic is going with Yugi versus Joey, Kaiba versus Yugi, Yugi somehow loses, or he wins and still says Kaiba needs to go fight on in the next. I don't know, like some ruling, some way, shape, or form. Kaiba's the one going into the finals. Seeing the duality of the Shadow Game affecting Joey, Marik saying, "Well, I'm going to do the same in this one." Shadow Game commences, but it resonates with Kaiba being on the field, and thus the Millennium Rod kind of has a bit of backlash, right? Marik casts it aside, and then Kaiba, just goes, "Well, not going to rely on your funny Egyptian shadow magic now," right? Thus being able to have a fair fight. I could kind of see that. Like, I don't know. It's kind of interesting because, like, you had to bow out to defeat Zork while Kaiba defeats Marik. I could see that, but I don't think it has the same audience. Like I would love if there was a half-step interim between Joey versus Marik. Yugi versus Kaiba still happens, but there's a half-step, like, elimination step where, I don't know, like, Kaiba and Marik have to duel, right? Where, I don't know. It's hard because that's not how tournament structure works, but I think that narratively would be the perfect place to put that, right? Like, maybe, Joey happens, and then Kaiba tries to get uppity with Marik, right? Or they get into a little bit of a fight, and thus they do a duel before Yugi versus Marik. I think that this would be a good place to have that fight. But that this doesn't follow any of the three structures we've done. I also don't. I mean, it could be done. I mean, in the anime, we've seen impromptu duels all the time. It's not impossible, right? But like what is it? Aster Phoenix versus Adrian Gecko, right? Was pretty impromptu, right? Echo just had to go over to Adrian, sacrifice to Exodia. Gratz, Adrian gets all the power, but Aster Phoenix does reasonably step in, saying you can't treat people like that. That's kind of scummy. Thus, having impromptu duel that really didn't need to have to happen in the first place. So, I don't know. It's so Goats Kaiba in an unofficial duel. I think the unofficial duel angle does also fit though, because that's very Marik, right? Because he and his rare hunters have cheated the entire time, right? Using literal counterfeit cards, right? Odeon had a counterfeit Winged Dragon of Ra, like literally, like, went to the funny printer and printed out an unofficial card that was being used in an official tournament, right? So the problem with Yugi versus Kaiba happened, Kaiba wouldn't have Obelisk. Exactly. Where I'm thinking that the interim step between after Joey versus Marik, but an interim before Yugi versus Kaiba, an unofficial duel in there, I think would make a lot of narrative sense and also whittle down a lot of variables. A lot of things would be static.
That also means that Marik would have to prioritize dueling and focus on it. And you could see a really much better duelist appear in this aspect. So it could be a double-edged sword in that aspect. Now, on the other side of the coin, Marik's weapons against Kaiba. The big one, the Winged Dragon of Ra, is the ultimate Egyptian god. It is a level higher than the other ones. So just Obelisk going against it, or
I forgot about this entirely. I thought in the TCG, they're all level 10.
A Slifer, they're always going to be a huge disadvantage. Technically, they can never really truly beat it. I mean, they can, but it takes a lot of work. So that's why two of them are really required to beat it. So with only having one Egyptian god, it's a big problem. Other weapons that Marik has is obviously the Shadow Games, whether they work against Kaiba or not, would be a debate. Kaiba, if he uses Crush Guard Virus on him, Marik has a couple low-level monsters that have like quite detrimental effects to cards that Kaiba would have. So I guess Crush Card Virus could not hit as many cards as maybe he wants to hit. And as well, with Marik having Defusion, that could be a problem because that hard counters Bly's Ultimate Dragon. Yeah. And obviously it can keep himself safe from the Fiend's Sanctuary play. So those are options that could happen for Marik. Marik wielding that Lava Golem, Kaiba having two Blue Eyes, White Dragons on the field, both getting tributed for a Lava Golem, taking 1,000 damage every turn. That could be really bad for Kaiba as well. Kaiba, obviously, as his big beatdown deck, having his cards locked into place by cards like Nightmare Wheel could be a big issue for him because there's another card like Holding Chains and Holding Legs. I think they affected the player, but I think they do affect monsters. But that could be quite bad for Kaiba, having his ultimate monsters just locked in place as his life points slowly whittle down.
Well, and this is why Kaiba has sacrificed a lot of big beat sticks, right? Where sure, maybe you have something like Vorse Raider and maybe even one of his blue eyes that are chained down by, say, Nightmare Wheel or something like that. Then you just sack 2, go another blue eyes, right? So you could actually cycle through those blue eyes pretty quickly, but it would be from a narrative standpoint, Marik never not truly letting Kaiba able to be in full control. Like maybe he gets up to 2 blue eyes and then Marik just drops something and it's just like, targeted destruction, right? He destroys 1 blue eyes and, Kaiba's constantly on the back foot because just when he starts to get a little bit of momentum going, Marik does Marik and keeps him on that back foot a little bit, right? Thus leading into a play where, eventually Kaiba's able to maybe get out 2 of them, Monster Reborn's into a third, or uses Marik's Monster Reborn with the funny doll, the mirror doll, and then be able to resurrect that third one, polymerization into the Blue Eyes Ultimate, tries to swing in. There's a number of things that can happen here. Like, I think it's one of those fights that I would love an official statement on, but I don't know if we'll ever get it at this point.
And I think just in general, Kaiba's beatdown, overwhelming, I'm going to put big monsters on the field and just attack into Marik. I feel like that is a bad matchup against Marik's sort of slower, more methodical, I'm going to lock down your plays, I'm going to disrupt your board, I'm just going to really punish your monsters kind of thing. So I feel like that could cost Kaiba. Whereas like Yugi's like a jack of all trades, adapts to situation. Kaiba does adapt a little bit. He makes a strategy beforehand, implements that strategy, and then most of the time that strategy fails, and then he sort of crumbles underneath it. So we need to see a really stepped up his game, Kaiba, to work against Marik's devious traps. Now, in the same breath, there is something else I might mention. Now, I'm not sure if it's 100% true. I'd have to check to see if this is true. But when Yugi dueled against Marik, not only was his objective to defeat Marik and get rid of evil Marik, but he also wanted to save good Marik and free him.
That was the secondary plot point.
So the duel is played so that not only does Yugi win, but it gives an opportunity for good Marik to take over, and then Marik, obviously good Marik, surrenders, getting rid of his evil half, and then Yugi just wins by default. But Kaiba, I can't imagine doing this. He would just duel to win. He don't care about good Marik, and if he did care about good Marik, he probably wouldn't believe it. Magic? I don't think that. Yeah, this could be a disadvantage really in both aspects. Like, it's bad for Marik because it's just someone just going all out. There's nothing holding him back. Yugi was also held back by the shadow magic, slowly erasing little Yugi kind of thing. Kaiba wouldn't really have that, especially if he has a resistance to shadow magic. However, you could say it's also a detriment because after Yugi freed good Marik surrendered. Now, I've already done a duel analysis of this duel. Yugi would have won regardless kind of thing. So, yeah, Kaiba loses out on potentially purifying Marik and just getting a auto win kind of thing. So, I mean, that is something to consider. Now,
this would also be at the detriment to the overall narrative because I still need to go and watch season 5. I've seen bits and pieces of it in the finale, but as far as I'm aware, like Marik and some of the Gravekeepers were required to be able to get to the point where the Millennium items could be slotted and led to the Pharaoh actually finally being able to move on. So I think it would be a detriment to the overall greater narrative if this were the final.
In terms of Obelisk versus Ra, Ra can deal with Obelisk whenever by just going into his Phoenix mode, paying 1,000 life points, and just blowing up Obelisk the Tormentor. So, like, that is a big issue for Kaiba, and that's something he'd need to deal with or react to. So, with all this in mind, could Seto Kaiba, with only one Egyptian god card, beat Yami Marik in the semifinals? Yes, I think he could, but I think statistically it's 50-50. I think it's a very even match and it could go absolutely either way.
If Kaiba is able to get his aggression going early game and is able to keep beating down Marik's board, I think Kaiba takes it. If Kaiba takes even 1 to 2 turns too long to get going, I think Marik just entrenches himself so hard that it's impossible to come back from. And Marik will continue to do play after play after play, which will actively come in at inopportune times. It will disrupt Kaiba's tempo, and I think he'll be playing on the back foot that entire time. I think I'm biased towards Kaiba. I would say probably 70-30. I think Kaiba has stuff in his kit to prevent certain things. He does have things to prevent things like hand ripping from Hellpomer. He does have certain things to counter the electric eel that that Joey didn't have, because he has monsters, as it turns out, that he can just sack his monsters for. Or he can say, if a Blue Eyes is down to, say, 2,000 because the eel shocked it twice, he can Ring of Destruction his own Blue Eyes with a Ring of Defense, and then, just deal 2,000 to Marik, which could get him down to crit range, right? It could threshold him for certain attacks, thus, just needing something like a Legend to close out the game. It depends how you want to play it, right? But we also have to consider the narrative aspect as well, where we know that a duel is not going to be quick. Even if Kaiba maintains the upper hand, right, there needs to be that interesting aspect sort of thing, right? They need to be interested and invested in that duel, which is why, if we are going for more of a quicker game state, the interim unofficial between Joey versus Marik and Yugioh versus Kaiba does make sense. That also does preserve the greater narrative being told here in regards to the Pharaoh being able to move on to the afterlife. I think that the unofficial interim is probably my headcanon. I'm definitely biased towards that idea, but to me it makes sense, and it keeps the most amount of things in place. I think it moves the least amount of pieces.
Marik hasn't proved himself to be a great duelist. Don't get me wrong, he's beat Bakura, he's beat Mai. A lot of these wins are due to the opponents fumbling the bag, not knowing what the Winged Dragon of Ra can do, taking it and then fumbling with it, or shadow magic getting in the win. If Kaiba has a resistance to shadow magic, if Kaiba doesn't fumble the bag with the Winged Dragon of Ra when he takes it with Lullaby of Obedience or anything like that, and if he can just go all out, then yeah, there is a strong chance that Kaiba could win this duel. And
actually, does Marik not have the card that had to get errated? Is it Makura? I'm trying to remember who used it. I'm looking at Makura the Destructor. That might have been an Odeon thing, though. Trying to remember what the unerrated version of it was, because it's had a couple erratas. Give me a second. Why aren't you showing me the change log? Of course you're not showing me the change log, because why would you show me the change log? Because modern wording is, during the turn this card is sent to the graveyard, the owner of this card can activate trap cards from his or her hand. That's the modern wording of it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is an Odeon thing, but I guess you could technically headcanon it to Marik as well. I don't know. That's a hard one, because something like Makura would be very, very good for Marik, especially if he's worried about Kaiba just destroying his board.
I made the point about the scaling. Kaiba did beat Joey quite easily, not too easily, but easily enough where I think he was confident with winning. That was without Obelisk. And if Joey was going to beat Marik, then I guess Kaiba technically should beat Marik, theoretically. And then with this in mind, in terms of anime-ness, this thematically works. Kaiba beats Marik and gets into the finals. Kaiba now has the Winged Dragon of Ra and Obelisk the Tormentor. Marik is just dead, unfortunately. Joey and Yugi's duel. Yugi beats Joey. I think that's the only way, unfortunately, that it works. But yeah. I think that Joey does win the Red Eyes Black Dragon off of Yugi in this duel. Basically, I think he does a play where he takes Red Eyes off of Yugi, gets him back onto his side, and loses the duel with Red Eyes Black Dragon on his side of the field. And Yugi's basically no, you've earned that. Right. You've won that card back. And then I don't know what Joey would give Yugi instead. Maybe he gives him Time Wizard back, and then this lets Yugi use Dark Sage in his duel in the finals against Kaiba. And this could be something like a make or break moment.
And then you just age the gods 1,000 years, but wait a minute, that doesn't affect them. Wait a minute, it's almost like they're gods.
Maybe he adds back Monster
I love this
Reborn,
though.
It's quite a significant card between Yugi and Kaiba. It pops up a lot in their duels. So maybe he Dark Sages with Time Wizard, gets Monster Reborn. Monster Reborn's back, Slife the Sky Dragon, is able to win with that or something like that. And then you got a final duel, Yugi versus Kaiba. Kaiba has 2 Egyptian gods. He's so close to achieving his goal of getting all 3 Egyptian god cards, defeating Yugi and winning his entire tournament. But at the last possible moment, Yugi turns it around, wins, shall we say, all the Egyptian god cards, that's like a deal. Because Kaiba would do that, wouldn't he? He's like, I'll bet all my Egyptian god cards. That's how confident I am that I'm going to win this duel. So Yugi gets them all. I don't know what happens with Yugi's lost memories.
Yeah.
Actually not.
Right, that becomes the issue, right? Is the greater narrative gets sacrificed if we assume Marik in an official capacity is beaten in an official Battle State tournament. Like,
too sure. Maybe Kaiba needs to purify Marik. I don't know how that would happen, but that would be an interesting. You should have a different next season. Like, Shizu is mad at Kaiba instead. Odeon's mad at Kaiba because he just straight up killed Marik. So it gets resolved in the next season. I don't know. It's just a new storyline. Moving on to scenario 2. Everything I just said stands, but in this scenario, Yugi has lost to Kaiba, has given Kaiba Slife the Sky Dragon. So Kaiba is in the finals going against Marik, who's just beaten Joey Wheeler. How would he do then? Well, I think he'd do exactly the same, but better. I would say he's gone from a 50-50 chance of beating Marik to a 60, 65, maybe even 70% chance of beating Marik. I feel that confident that Kaiba could do it. And I think what would help his chances, I think what goes from 60 to 70% is if Yugi did the same for Kaiba that Kaiba did. Because Kaiba gave Yugi that Fiend Sanctuary card to help him beat Marik. Now, Yugi doesn't have a card like that, but maybe you could give him a card that could help Slifer. It's like, Slifer requires a lot of cards in your hand. You'll need this card. So I don't know what I'd give him. Just something that you could draw a lot of cards with to help out Kaiba. I'd like to say you'd give him Ragnarok, but Ragnarok requires 2 spellcasters or magician monsters in order to use its ability, because that was the...
And they also already have, like, he also already has Card of Sanctity. He also already has Card of Demise. Kaiba's got plenty of draw power, honestly.
Card that he used to defeat Marik. Maybe just change its effect slightly in the anime. He has to have 2 magicians or 2 dragons of eyes or something like that in order to work. You could totally do that. And then that way, Yugi and Kaiba together has technically beat Marik together kind of thing. So, I mean, that's something you could do. And in terms of the final scenario...
I like it as an exploratory scenario. I think that depending on how that works and depending if Yugi and Mokuba can convince Kaiba to not outright just, blast Marik off the face of the earth, sure, you could also keep the greater narrative and play there. I think that maybe audiences would be a little sad to see Kaiba as the one in the finale, because I know a lot of us, a lot of people, me included, are just like, oh yeah, it's got to be Yugi in that finale, right? Like, I mean, naturally so. That's a restriction of the narrative. So I think I like the exploration of this scenario, and I think Kaiba, especially if he gets the gas going, pedal to the metal very early, I think that he can absolutely sweep.
He had Joey versus Kaiba, and then Marik versus Yugi. Kaiba beats Joey because we know he can beat Joey.
Yeah.
I'd like to say he took his Red Eyes Black Dragon off him, but he doesn't have it at that point. So he takes something else, or he takes nothing.
His Jinzo.
That's probably what Kaiba would do. And then Yugi loses to Marik Ishtar, gives him Slife the Sky Dragon. Now, the thematic problem with this scenario is Yugi dying after this, which would be terrible for the story. They'd never do that.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to make it so that Marik's like, Pharaoh, I'm not going to kill you just yet. I'm going to leave you in suspended animation, one of those hourglass things, so you can watch at least the finals. I'm going to kill Kaiba, win this whole tournament, take the final Egyptian god card for myself. You're going to watch the whole thing, then you're going to die. That way it works. That way you can sort of...
I can see that.
...alive and everything. So then, now, what an upset. What a change of story. Yugi, undefeated, has actually lost. The threat of the world is endangered. It's all up to Kaiba. He's never proved himself before to be a world-saving person. However, this is where Kaiba, story-wise, would have to do it, right?
Yeah.
Or you just end the series with Marik winning and taking over the world or something like that. But, like, statistically-wise, I actually think Kaiba wouldn't win this duel. If Marik has... Slifer and Ra against Kaiba with just Obelisk.
Because remember, Slifer has that ability to just cut 2,000 points attack or defense off of something when it's summoned. So now imagine the oppressiveness of Marik with the Winged Dragon of Ra, but every time Kaiba summons something, like Tribute 2 for Blue Eyes, cuts 2 grand off its attack, it now is a 1k beater. Like, I think that when we start looking at it from this perspective, I don't think Kaiba has it. I don't think... Marik gets that ball rolling, I don't think he's able to get it going, though. I don't think Kaiba can actually succeed in this.
No, he shouldn't really be able to win. I would say Kaiba's chances of victory go down to like 30% or something like that. Don't get me wrong, he might be able to do it, but the odds are so stacked against Kaiba. But in that same breath, that would be the most amazing thing. Despite all the odds, maybe Marik takes Obelisk off of Kaiba as well. And then Kaiba has to go against all 3 Egyptian god cards with just his original deck, and he manages to do it. That would be incredible. However, that does rob the final season of its ultimate thing, where little Yugi takes on all 3 Egyptian god cards at once and wins, something nobody else had ever done. So, like, you've got to consider that. And with that, those are my opinions on what if Kaiba and Marik dueled in the Battle City Finals. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you agree or disagree with anything. If you want to buy yourself a weird hybrid of the Red Eyes Black Dragon and Blue Eyes White Dragon together, well, I have a t-shirt for it.
I was wondering what that was.
But other than that, thank you all for watching. Catch you later.
So I actually really liked this. I thought there was a lot of good things that were brought up in this discussion. I think that it's a really good hypothetical scenario, one that we'll never get, let's be honest. And I think that's kind of sad. But I think that the timing does matter in this. I think that there's a lot of good hypotheticals to throw around. I think that there's a lot of considerations to make, not just from a metagame perspective, not just from a mechanical perspective, but from a narrative perspective as well. And I think ultimately it does give you more appreciation as to why we got what we did, why Yugi versus Marik was the finale versus Yugi versus Kaiba, right? Or Kaiba versus Marik, right? I think it's kind of cool to be able to go through and just go back through some of this. I thought this was a good discussion. Hopefully you did as well. I had a blast. Let me know what your thoughts are. I'll see you in the next one.